Okay, we're live.
Yay! Welcome, everyone. We're so excited. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to join. Welcome to the second session in our Learning for Collective Action series. This session is titled Dyslexia Identification, a Tool for Literacy Equity, ? We're going to kind of investigate this question as we go through some of our presentations today. First, we want to thank everyone for their support in making this possible. We really appreciate the support of the Skillman Foundation, of TFA Detroit, and TFA Detroit's Michigan Education Policy Fellowship, of which I am an alum. I also want to thank Teach for America Greater Chicago, Northwest Indiana, for giving me this lovely space to present in today. So thank you all so much. All right. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. So if you watched our last session, you know me, but my title has maybe changed a little bit. My name is Amber Gustafson. I am now the Policy and Digital Engagement Consultant at 313 Reads. I've worked with 313 Reads since September. Now I am working as this Policy and Digital Engagement Consultant. Recently graduated from the University of Michigan with my master's degree, and I was a high school teacher for 5 years in Memphis, Tennessee. Very excited to continue educational equity work with 313 Reads now. I also would love to introduce my co-facilitator and new Director of Collective Learning and Resources at 313 Reads, Elise Hartman. Elise has a background in public relations and has been an educator for over a decade. She's a writer, curriculum developer, strategist with experience working in social service settings, nonprofits, and community development corporations. Her previous role was as a Director of Education at MACC Development. Elise is the founder and CEO of Nesting Birds Publishing and, as I've previously stated, wonderfully, the Director of Collective Learning and Resources here at 313 Reads. Thank you so much for joining the team, Elise. So happy to have you here.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So we are going to go ahead, and as people are kind of trickling in to our session, we want to model for you something that we do internally as a team that we feel is very important in terms of setting our culture and also making sure that we all know we have an equal voice and an equal say in this discussion. So you all, our audience members, have the ability to come in and bring in comments and questions, and we want to respond to those. We all have a vested interest in this topic and this discussion, and we want to hear from you. So this is going to be our first ability or chance to do so. We start every meeting with a restorative check-in. What or who inspires your daily work? I'm going to go ahead and model first, and if the rest of our participants as well can model after me. We usually do a call on kind of popcorn style. So Elise, just so you know, I'm going to call on you next. But I'm going to go ahead and start as our audience puts these in the chat. What or who inspires your daily work? I think this is probably a pretty obvious answer for those of us that are or have been educators. What really drives me is my former students. The students that I still keep in contact with, who I have a vested interest in their future and growth, and know the things that I could have done previously or the systems that I could have helped to change that would have benefited those students. Those are what motivate me every single day to make the educational world more equitable and better for students. So that is who inspires my daily work. And I'm going to pass it on to Elise. What or who inspires your daily work?
I'd have to say it's my purpose. So I'm very purpose-driven and goal-oriented. So I would say as an urban educator and as someone working in this field, I would definitely say it's my purpose that inspires me and that drives me. And I'm going to pass it on to Leah.
Thanks, Elise. I think it's a little bit piggybacking off Amber, former students of mine, and I was previously a classroom teacher and university professor, and I always think about other folks who are first generation high school and college graduates and how we ensure that all students have the opportunity to do that and support them even beyond that. So that's what inspires me, and I will pass it to you, Adria.
I have to say, as a university instructor, the people that inspire me every day are the students that I teach in my undergraduate and master's and doctoral programs. They come up with the most amazing things, and especially this past year, I had teachers who were working in their schools and doing their coursework on nights and weekends. And what they were able to do in the face of the big challenges this year was really incredible. And I'll pass to Nancy.
Thanks. Yeah, I think my initial inspiration for my daily work is my students in Oakland, California and in Berkeley, California, working with students to make sure that they have access to opportunity. And now on sort of a daily basis, it is my children and my family who support me in this work.
Wonderful. And I love Kristen sharing with the adults that she works with, right, every day. Emily, for your children, right? We need to make sure that we have the best possible education, not only for our children, but for everyone, right? And sometimes that personal connection is the most important. Thank you all so much for sharing and being vulnerable with this restorative check-in. And thank you to our audience members for participating. Okay, this is a reminder. If you are here and you have not registered, you will not be entered into our book giveaway for Overcoming Dyslexia. So you can go to tinyurl.com/LFCA Series 3. I'm going to be pulling all of those names that have registered at the end of this session for a little raffle to who can win a free copy of Overcoming Dyslexia. So if you have not registered, please do so. That is tinyurl.com/LFCA Series 3. All right, after that personal plug, again, just want to situate us. Where are we in this Learning for Collective Action series? So we've already had one previous session, Understanding Dyslexia and Addressing Common Misconceptions. This is the next one around dyslexia identification. You can see that we have 3 more to go. So we're really excited to continue this series. And I'm going to pass it over to Elise to talk to us about this collective action series, what it looks like, and why we're doing this in the first place.
Yeah, so we're doing this to provide accessible learning opportunities for community members on dyslexia. We're also doing this to increase knowledge of state-level dyslexia policy and offer avenues of civic engagement, and as a professional learning opportunity for evidence-based practices in working with students with dyslexia.
Thank you so much, Elise. I also want to, my personal oopsie, I love norming and having my pronouns everywhere so that everyone knows how to refer to me. Just wanted to let you all know that my pronouns are she, her, hers. So please use those when referring to me. Thank you. All right, and instead of me introducing today's panelists, I'm going to have our panelists and discussants introduce themselves. So we are going to start with Nancy. Please introduce yourself and please include your pronouns.
I will. Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Nilsson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an assistant professor of special education at Boston University, which is a new thing for me. It's not going to be new for very long. I'm going into my 2nd year as a professor at Boston University. I was a research professor at the University of Oregon for a decade prior to coming to Boston University. I'm a former special education teacher. I was a special education teacher, as I mentioned, in Oakland, California, and Berkeley, California. Got my graduate degree in school psychology, my PhD in school psychology from the University of Oregon. And my expertise is really focused on the implementation of multi-tiered systems of support, in particular reading and math interventions, and the use of assessment within those systems to ensure that all students have access to an effective education. I'm here today as a representative of the National Center on Improving Literacy. I'm a deputy director of that center. And our focus is really on ensuring that students with disabilities related to literacy have access to effective screening, intervention, and instructional methods within their schools, and that the stakeholders that are advocating for them have access to evidence-based resources to do so. It's great to be here.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you, Nancy. And Adria, I'm going to pass it to you. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Adria Truckenmiller. I'm an associate professor of special education and school psychology at Michigan State University. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And you can see kind of the things that I work on. My expertise lies in using assessment in better ways to more equitably address the needs of all children in schools, especially students with disabilities, students who are at risk for reading and writing in particular. And one of the things that I want to highlight, one of the big projects that we're working on is we currently have a federally funded training grant from the Office of Special Education Programs, where we are able to offer free tuition to people who want to get their master's degrees and in either special education or or an EDS in school psychology. And so that we want people who are currently working in schools to be experts in intensive reading instruction for the kids who need it the most. So we're accepting applicants for that for 2023. That's not this upcoming fall, but the following fall. So we hope that you all will spread that out to your networks and encourage people to join that program. Thanks.
That sounds amazing, Adria. Even for me personally, I've always had a slight interest in school psychology, so maybe I'll be an applicant. We'll see. Thank you so, so much. And finally, our last discussant, Leah, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Van Bell, and I serve the 301 Reads Coalition as the executive director. Like everyone here and my colleagues and partners across the coalition have a deep commitment to literacy, access, and equity, so that it's not just about getting our babies to grade level. It's about addressing all the barriers and building on all of the assets that are already there. So really thankful to be here together and that we all share that commitment. I'm also the president of the Michigan Reading Association. So MRA is also co-convening this session. And you saw from the flyer on the first slide, and we'll see again later, we have so many partners who have been a part of this. Grateful to Amber for sort of championing this, bringing it all together. So thank you, Amber. And the Michigan Reading Association, Amber's going to share a bit about the conference later. So we'll learn a bit about that. I am also the vice chair of the board of directors of the Black Male Educators Alliance. I care a lot about teacher diversity and how we make the teaching profession more accessible and attractive to folks and retain our teachers. I'm proud to be a Detroiter. My son goes to elementary school here in Detroit, public school. And I always joke about he's teaching me to build with Lego. I'm not good at it. It's very humbling. And yeah, just grateful to be here. And thank you everyone for your time and bringing all your expertise and life experiences to help us learn more about dyslexia. I was sharing with Amber, I said, you know, I have an undergrad, a master's, and a PhD in literacy, and I never learned much about dyslexia, right? And I was a classroom teacher and didn't know a lot about dyslexia. And so I think that we have this culture on our coalition and on our team. And I suspect that's why folks are here. Like, we're all committed to lifelong learning and to being vulnerable about what we know and don't know and making brave spaces to grow. So please, as we're here together today, drop questions and thoughts in the chat. We'll lift those up. We really want to make this a space to get questions answered, to really dig into this so that we're coming away with better understandings.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Leah. Also, I feel you on building with Legos. It really stretches my imagination and my future thinking. So kudos to you and kudos to your son. All right. So we are going to move into our first section, which is dyslexia screening now. What does that look like? What do we mean by dyslexia identification and some of the language that we use around this? I want to make sure that I'm very clear about, yes, we're still learning, and there are more links that are going to be coming to learn more about this, more about what identification looks like, links to what is happening in the Michigan Senate with regard to dyslexia laws, to learn about your elected officials, whether they support those laws or not, ways that you can get in contact with them, all of those great things. Those are going to be coming afterwards. So this is still an informational session, and I want to encourage as much civic engagement as we can around this. So as we move into the first session, I would love to ask Adria, what happens before a student is screened for dyslexia? So what does it mean to say that a student is at risk, and why do we use that terminology? And how are students determined to be at risk for dyslexia or otherwise indicated as needing screening?
Thanks for that really big question, Amber. I could talk for a long time about all of this. But the big points that I want to draw out is, as a lot of people have been hearing recently, we're really focusing a lot on early elementary education, particularly around establishing reading very early on. And the reason that we're doing that is because we know if we can provide students with high quality reading instruction to get them reading early, that they can be exposed to the maximum amount of knowledge out there. And we know that content knowledge is a huge, huge piece for all students and for all subjects, that we want to expand that. So if we can get students to be able to decode the text and read read more text, we can expand their content knowledge and really facilitate education for them. And so one of the key pieces of dyslexia is a longer period of time to learn to decode. And so that's why there's this emphasis on that piece, but also understanding that our whole goal is reading comprehension and building of that content knowledge part. And dyslexia tends to impact, in particular, that decoding piece. And we can pick up on that. One of the big themes that I wanted to talk about today is picking up on that for kids who have dyslexia and who need more intensive instruction in order to break the code of reading. There's also a large number of students who will take longer or need more intensive instruction to get that decoding piece as well. And the instruction that works for students who have dyslexia and the students who need that more intensive intervention is equally effective. So one of my main things for equity is to make sure we're providing that high quality and level of intensity of instruction needed. One of the struggles that we've had in the past with using these terms at risk and using disabilities is I've been in a lot of schools, and we've kind of learned this little bit of a culture of saying, things are going to be challenging because the student has a disability, or the student is an English learner, or this group of students have more challenges at home. And so I think this blame almost, it's kind of implicit. And we really need to be very intentional about not making that blame on the children or the families. And a lot of times it also falls on our teachers as well, but thinking about it more as I think about it this way as a systems issue, and thinking about how our systems perpetuate this. And unfortunately, the terminology almost seems to draw that further. So instead, I like to think about it we're all on our own journey of learning different things. For example, my brother is very, very good at mechanics. He can take something apart and put it back together in an instant. I would never be able to do that. It will take me much longer to learn that kind of thing if I needed to learn that. Whereas reading, I picked up without much instruction at all, whereas he needed more instruction in reading than I did. So it's all about finding where students are at in their progression of learning how to read and helping to do that. So that being said, we can start really early. We can start in pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, identifying some of the things that will let us know we might need to provide more intensive or more sustained instruction in reading. And so I want to ask the audience here on this next slide, what factors you might think of that are associated with dyslexia or this need for more sustained instruction. So put in the chat or on Facebook Live, which numbers 1 through 6 you think are something that we should adjust our school systems to look for. So would it be looking for students who reverse B's and D's early on? Would it be a family history of reading challenges? Would it be early exposure to neurotoxins? There's many neurotoxins out there. In Michigan, we're familiar with lead in the soil and in paint and in our drinking water. Would it be students who persist in using their finger to track words while they're reading? Would it be performance on intelligence measures or other cognitive measures, visual motor integration, memory assessment? Or would it be performance on phoneme, which are sounds, phoneme blending or deletion, word reading, non-word reading, reading fluency, rapid automatized naming? And rapid automatized naming is a instant recognition of symbols. So I see we have one response in the Facebook, a couple of responses in the Facebook chat on 1, 3, and 5. These actually are the ones that are not risk factors associated with dyslexia. So thank you, 313 Reads, for identifying those ones that are not. So Amber, if you go on to the next slide, you'll see the ones that we've learned that are the actual risk factors in different studies that show that we might want to just raise our attention and pay attention. So one of the biggest ones is number 6. This is why a lot of legislation has been going around the country on early screening. So looking for how students do with these predictors of future reading success. And so we know students who develop this earlier and students who are taught these aspects of reading earlier build on those much more quickly and then have access to the code, which is not the only piece of reading, but in these earlier ages, and especially for children with dyslexia who decoding is their specific area of need, we know that these things are helpful to look at. There's been a lot of really fascinating research recently in the past 20 years by the Learning Disabilities Research Centers. So I find a lot of people aren't familiar with the Learning Disabilities Research Centers, so I just want to take a second. We have them in our resources slide later. You can go to the Learning Disabilities Research Centers and find out what research is currently happening. Oh, I love this comment about finding out early. I'm excited that you are seeing that as a major theme. I believe that's also a major theme of the research that's come out in the past 20 to 30 years. These Learning Disabilities Research Centers are funded by the National Institutes of Health, and they have sustained projects that look at helping us identify and treat dyslexia and finding these other markers of what might be really helpful. So with that being said, let's move on to the next slide, please.
Could I interrupt just really quickly, Adria, because I would love to talk about some of the ones that were not highlighted on this slide. So if you all watched our previous session with Kristen Dwyer and Susan Ward-Schmidt, we talked specifically about number 1, right? This is one of those societal myths that we think, oh, if you mix up your B's and D's, right, they're like flipped across this axis, like that means dyslexia, and that is not the case. And then also something like number 5, right? This again goes into that deficit-based framing. It is not about someone who is less intelligent on our like racist ideas of what IQ is based on. It is truly about what are the specific needs of every individual learner. Like Adria said, we are all on our own tracks to learning, and we all have our own speeds at which we can go. So I just wanted to highlight those very quickly. Thank you so much for adding those in, Adria, and we can move on to the next slide.
Can I just pop into so this is really important and interesting, Adria, and I'm so glad you've lifted this up. And I was really excited to see that the folks were really naming number 6, right? Because so much emphasis is still placed, like Amber said, on the letter reversal, on visual discrimination, and like tracking. So it's so much emphasis is still placed on visual, and like not sure where that came from, but we still find places where people feel like if you put a certain color overlay over a piece of text, that kids with dyslexia now can read with the colored overlay. I don't even know where that came from, but I think it gets to the popularity of I don't know, quite some time when I was teaching, there was this emphasis on like multiple intelligences, right? Which is thoroughly debunked. But I think it just, one of our key levers in our coalition is collective learning. And part of collective learning is, we're all teachers, we're all learners, but we really want to make sure that we're implementing evidence-based practices. And so thanks for naming that these are the things that are risk factors, and that clearly it's about, that number 6, it's about this code-based work, right? And so it's not even just about, from what I'm hearing you say, like, well, they're just on a slower timeline sometimes. It's that really it's about, how things are working differently with code in the brain. So looking forward to you telling us more about this. But it's just puzzling how it's still so persistent that it's all visual.
Yeah, I really like how you framed that, Leah. So switching from it being a visual to actually a sound, a phonologically based, and that's based on newer research. It's not that new, but it's based on research that's been going on. So thank you for lifting that up. What I think is also a shift in the kind of general public thought process about dyslexia and identifying dyslexia and students who would be at risk for dyslexia is we really want to take a big focus on instruction. So coming away from the cognitive abilities that are more set on their own trajectory. We want to look at instruction, which we can have control over, and we know that has an impact. So as I mentioned previously, the implications for what we should do in instruction is similar for students who have dyslexia as students who have some risk factors for dyslexia, as students who are performing below benchmark on those metrics in number 6 that we measured, or that we mentioned in the previous slide. And so there's a large amount of students in our classrooms who have these particular instructional needs. So we know that from our national assessment data that about 35% of the 4th graders in the United States are performing below benchmark on those metrics. So that's a large number of students in our class. We also know that some of those students are students with dyslexia. We also know that some of those students who are performing above benchmark also may have dyslexia as well. And you'll see various numbers estimating the percentage of students with dyslexia. These vary more than our numbers that we know of students performing below benchmark in reading. And this is because it's been so challenging to nail down in the population what the criteria for dyslexia are, because many people use very different criteria for identifying dyslexia, and this is why we have such varying estimations. And so we'll talk a lot more about the different types of criteria in the next piece of this, but I just wanted to highlight that. And the bottom line is there are many students who would benefit from instruction that's high quality and meets the level students are at in their development of these reading skills that we've found through research to be to drive students' learning. And so as one of our commenters on Facebook mentioned, identifying her children earlier would have helped for more the right kind of instruction that would meet her children's needs. And so what's great is different organizations, for example, Nancy's organization, the National Center for Improving Literacy, has been doing a lot of really good work increasing the public's knowledge about things. Another organization is NCII. This is the National Center for Intensive Intervention, and we link to their evaluation of all of the many reading screening tools that are available out there, and they compare them on different things. So I find that to be really helpful. That's a starting place that I often give to schools. I worked with the state of Mississippi. Some of you may know Kimiana Burke, who's been doing really great things across the country. Talked with her way back in 2013 about using this chart to help Mississippi to identify their reading screening tools that they were going to use. And so the key thing here, again, I want to highlight is we're using this to identify who needs instruction, because it's more important that we identify the instruction that everyone needs, especially for equity purposes, so that we make sure that we catch everybody. And this will kind of move into then identifying students who have dyslexia. So I will pass it back to you, Amber.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, great introduction to that basic identification and screening process. And I think this visual is also so incredibly helpful and really underscores your point, right, of every student is going to benefit from these intensive, individualized, high-quality instructional practices. And that is kind of the underlying of this entire series, right? So we have a future session that is specifically about evidence-based practices that educators, program providers, and really anyone who's working with students in this capacity or children in this capacity can implement in their own practices. So thank you so much. I am going to pass it off to my co-facilitator, Elise.
Yeah, we actually have another question for you, Adria. What does a student's dyslexia screening look like now?
That is a great question. Yeah, so what we're technically doing is we're screening for risk, especially in K1 and 2. So what's great about all of those tools on that NCII tools chart is they're all efficient and brief. So if we're going to catch everybody and not let anyone fall through the cracks, we need something that can be feasibly done with the entire school. And so most of these assessments that are on there are less than 30 minutes. Some of them are 5 minutes per student that it will take, or they're a whole classroom can be done. They can do a computer screener in 20-ish minutes. So that's the key, is having this efficient identification of students who are at risk. And then so we monitor those students who fall below the benchmark on any of those, on whatever the school adopts as their reading screening. And I've been excited to work with a lot of schools in Michigan who are all, I've got to say, Michigan teachers are so impressive to me. What they want to do, to Leah's point of continuing learning and to continue to do what's best for their students, is really inspiring. And I've been seeing them grab a hold of this really well. And then they're going to provide supplemental evidence-based reading instruction to those students to meet right where they are based on that reading screening measurement, and provide some instruction. And then we're monitoring that 3 times a year. So most schools use those screening assessments 3 times a year to make sure that the instruction, the supplemental instruction, and the general instruction that's occurring in their classroom is at their level, meeting their needs. Which then I believe leads us to the next piece of this. So after we're monitoring students for their progress, we then definitely need to provide the intensive instruction for students who do have dyslexia. And so the definition for dyslexia, you'll see many definitions across the board, but the biggest thing with dyslexia is that it's unexpected low achievement in reading. And unexpected used to mean that we would that it was unexpected based on their cognitive abilities. But now we know that unexpected means we've given them really high quality instruction, and their learning trajectory in reading is still falling below the trajectory that we would expect it to be. So that's what we mean by unexpected. So before I dive into how we identify dyslexia with those official criteria, I'm really curious. I've seen all kinds of criteria used. We know from a couple slides ago that many different criteria are used in different places to identify dyslexia. So I'm wondering what criteria you've seen used in maybe your local school or around your area. So if you could put in the chat numbers 1 through 6, and it could be more than one of these, what approach you've seen, what set of criteria you've seen used to identify dyslexia. And if you choose number 6, can you let me know? Because I'm really curious what that other approaches are. So in our legislation, the IDEA, for example, says that schools can use other evidence-based approaches. And I always wonder what those other ones are. So if anybody has one in there, I will learn a whole ton today.
I can go ahead and offer my experiences from my previous teaching career, still teaching, educator career. But I was a high school teacher, so there wasn't a ton of, we need to catch this now, right? Like we really do focus on that early childhood education. But I do remember being an RTI educator and saying, I think we need to refer this student for further testing. So we really went with number 3. But again, that was at the high school level, so a little bit different.
Thank you, Amber. That was really helpful. I love this excellent point by Christy on Facebook. That's exactly right. That the term dyslexia is not in the IDEA legislation that governs identifying students with disabilities. So students who have dyslexia will qualify under the category specific learning disability. And under specific learning disability, there are several categories that students with dyslexia may qualify under. One of them is basic skills in reading. One of them is reading fluency. And then sometimes students also have reading comprehension designation as well under specific learning disability. So thanks for bringing up that interesting point. And then, Catherine, oh my gosh, this is just so lovely that you pointed out that identification seems to depend on resources available to address that. And this is a thing that I've been anecdotally talking about in my own practice. I've been working with some parents trying to help advocate for their kids. And when we get into a school meeting, they'll often say, well, we have this special education classroom available, but the curriculum that we use there is not the right match for this student. And so, this is a major challenge. And I really feel for parents, and I don't know the answer is we've got to keep doing all of the things that everyone in this room are doing, and to bring attention to how we can do that. So let me talk about these different approaches.
Adria, I'm sorry. Yeah. Could I just piggyback off that last comment? Because even when with Michigan Department of Education redoing the teacher preparation standards for literacy, a lot of conversation around inclusion of the word dyslexia in there. And if teachers, reading specialists, should that term be used in being clear about what expectations were? And it was really a hotbed topic, because exactly what was just lifted here, a lot of folks at the table from districts said, like, no, like, and often they're discouraged from even using that word because it's not going to get any additional services for the children, right? So it's interesting that in some ways it's become, we don't talk about this, right? Which is a very far swing from sort of over-identification of children, as having dyslexia. And something that I wanted to lift up, I was still taught in grad school that we look for a difference between read aloud comprehension and independent reading comprehension. And if there was a significant difference, I'm seeing some nods that could be an indicator of dyslexia. So this is really fascinating to just to hear how we're just getting cleaner and cleaner in our understanding of like what really is an indicator of that, right?
One other comment, just sort of without derailing the conversation, I think when we think about what dyslexia is, it exists on a continuum, right? And so when we're talking about effective instruction, particularly in the early grades, the things that students with or at risk for dyslexia are going to need in terms of their instruction, and Adria pointed this out a little bit earlier, they benefit all students, right? We know when we look at national performance data, if we have 60% of our kids that are failing, that means that our instructional approach isn't working for the vast majority of kids. And we really need to be adhering to that evidence in our instruction, so as we're talking about, schools don't have maybe dyslexia specific resources available. They do have the resources or the theoretical knowledge we could apply in that context of core instruction to support all students, which would benefit those students with dyslexia as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. People are so much better at succinctly putting things than me. So this is why I like a team approach. Thank you all for doing that. So Leah pointed out one of these unexpected low reading achievement, and that's comparing listening comprehension to reading. And so that it has been one of those ways that was historically the number one way of doing things. And so this discrepancy, so when we use the term discrepancy, we mean this discrepancy between either their listening comprehension and their reading, or this discrepancy between their intelligence and their reading performance. So this has been a long-standing way to think about things. And so the original way in 1974 that students were identified with a specific learning disability in reading or dyslexia was to use this achievement discrepancy approach. But they found that it misses a lot of these students, like Nancy mentioned, that it misses these students who we could be serving by providing better instruction. And so another approach came about, which was called patterns of strengths and weaknesses. And we know now, this has a little bit more research about it. However, we do know from other pieces of research that this is very similar to a IQ achievement discrepancy model, in that we're looking at finding areas of cognitive strengths for students. So we're still administering cognitive assessments like intelligence assessments like IQ, and then finding the reading weaknesses. So this still has those similar challenges that we're not capturing all students. And I'll refer to Jack Fletcher and Jeremy Misiak's work, where they really tackle this in depth and try to look at that. And that's linked in the resources slide. So they suggest that we use really focus on instruction, because that's how we can make sure we catch everybody by providing high quality instruction to everyone, and then making it more intensive based on students' needs. And then if they're still not responding to intensive instruction that we know is high quality and implemented well, then it's unexpected. And we need to really keep sustaining that level, and we need special education services to do that. There's also been some better assessments that have come out of the Learning Disabilities Research Center's work. Like Rick Wagner created the CTOP that addresses those areas that are specific to dyslexia. So that kind of information can help us in addition to response to intervention frameworks. And so they came up with something called a hybrid model or a constellation model. And if you can go to the next slide, Amber, what this ends up doing is this is what I see as the best next step that schools can go to. And I think a lot of schools are, whether they call it the hybrid model or not, are doing some version of this where they're collecting response to instruction information and they're collecting some measures of the key indicators of dyslexia like you would find in the CTOP assessment. So for parents and the general public, what I want to draw your attention to is the types of constructs or the types of domains of reading that you would want to see in an evaluation for dyslexia. And so this gets more intensive. So unlike the screening for risk, that's really efficient, very short, 5 minutes, we have these longer individually administered assessments that are typically done by a school psychologist like Nancy or I, or done by a special education teacher. We train our special education teachers at MSU to administer these assessments as well. And so it would be the key thing is, to Leah's point, is sounds, how students process the sounds in words. So we see in all of these references below that phonemic awareness is a key indicator. Also, any type of word reading and spelling, whether it's timed or untimed, but especially timed measures tend to show us the students who are on a range of dyslexia. So to Nancy's point of having a range of dyslexia, we know that students that take longer to instruct have challenges in multiple of these areas. So if a student has just one of these areas, we can predict that the instruction will work probably more quickly. But if we want to measure a lot of these, so we know how much the intensity of instruction to provide. And then also the other big thing is making sure we're providing that instruction and that we're doing some measure of progress after a period of instruction. The challenging part here is that it's not just our one and done evaluation that we're so used to for pretty much the 1970s to 2000 was we would just do an evaluation, say, yep, the student meets the criteria for dyslexia or specific learning disability, or they don't. Now we know that instruction is such an important thing. So we have to provide instruction for a sustained period of time, whether that's 6 to 8 to 13 weeks. But we also want to get them quickly too. So we're in a push and pull on how much time we do that intervention period. And there's still research to be done to iron that out. It also puts a lot of strain on our school systems, which we have to develop the systems to be able to do this, which is where Nancy and I's work in multi-tiered systems of support is trying to go, and we're still trying to make these easier for schools to implement. So that's that on that. And I'm pretty much sure I'm way over my time. So I will pass it back to you to go on to the next question.
No, thank you so much, Adria. I think, we all have these grand plans of like what's going to happen and how long everything is going to take. But I really love our organic kind of discussion and all of us really adding to this conversation. I think that's what I had really hoped for. And I think that's what's most beneficial for everyone, right? Is we are all sharing together. We are going to move a little bit more into kind of supports and equitable progress. So what are the things that we can do now within schools as parents, families, caregivers, as educators? What are the ways that we can use this knowledge to really support students in our classrooms? So I am going to ask Nancy, how does dyslexia identification impact school support? So we've talked a little bit about this, but what about with students with IEPs and 504s, available support services? We talked previously, sometimes it's just a learning disability and not necessarily specifically dyslexia. And if there are any, federal policies for things like serious emotional disturbance or SED impacting services for children with dyslexia.
Well, these are all big, important questions, obviously. Starting with the first one related to dyslexia identification for students with IEPs and 504s. This is in particular a great question because the supports that students are able to access differs by whether they have an IEP or a 504 plan. And one thing that I think is always shocking for parents to learn and community stakeholders as well is that students who are identified with dyslexia may not get access to special education. So the way that we identify students as being eligible for special education in schools has to do with whether or not children need that specially designed instruction or need additional support in a special education context in order to support them to learn commensurate with other children without disabilities. So our 504 plans are essentially what get provided to students who have identified disabilities who don't demonstrate that need for special education. And what comes with a 504 is that you get access to accommodations to support your access to the general curriculum or general education, but it doesn't come generally with getting any sort of access to specific instruction or specialized instruction based on your disability category. In contrast, if you have an individualized education plan or IEP, that means that you have in the school setting demonstrated that you have sufficient educational need to warrant special education placement and getting specially designed instruction in that context. So when we think about dyslexia and dyslexia identification, it's particularly complicated for all of the reasons that Adria walked through related to how we identify dyslexia, quote unquote, where it's not a specific category that's outlined in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's referenced in the specific learning disability category. And so when we're identifying students as having dyslexia in schools, it's really through this SLD or specific learning disability lens, which means we're using the approaches to identification that we use for SLD more broadly. So when it comes to identifying the specific supports that students with dyslexia will get, it's really at the school's discretion to figure that out based on the other data sources that they're collecting. So complicated, as we say. I will say, going back to this notion of response to intervention, just because we don't have very good identification processes for dyslexia specifically in a school context, doesn't mean that we can't give students the supports that they need within that setting. And so this notion of response to intervention, which is a prevention-oriented framework, really nested underneath this umbrella of multi-tiered systems of support now. It's evolved, over the last couple of decades as we've gathered more information about school systems and what would be most effective for kids. And the response to intervention nomenclature and framework was really built to try and address this issue of a wait to fail approach, where we wait too long to identify a discrepancy between a child's intelligence and their achievement, not to mention all the sociocultural factors that are compounded with that approach. But that wait to fail approach is really doing our students a disservice when we know that early intervention and prevention is the best way that we can make sure that students aren't falling behind, aren't needing intensive support, that they are able to read effectively. So within this response to intervention framework, we want to use it should be a flexibly oriented system. So we want to be able to provide supports to students as soon as they need them, using screening data to tell us whether or not a child needs supplemental support within a general education context. And so this is another important point related to response to intervention, is that for the service provision aspect of response to intervention is really a general education function. So we want to be providing really effective core reading instruction. And in the early grades, we know what that looks like, which I'll comment on it in a little bit. Supplemental support for students that are demonstrating that they need supplemental support. Sometimes that's called intervention, sometimes it's called supplemental. It sort of depends on your system, but that there's something else that these children are getting in addition to this core instruction if they have these needs early on. And then we're monitoring their response to that effective supplemental instruction. We have a lot of evidence for what we would call supplemental or tier 2 kind of interventions for teaching kids to read, particularly in foundational reading skills, particularly in the early grades. And we should be relying on that evidence to support what we're doing in our school systems. So Response to intervention, again, has the service provision sort of aspect and also this identification sort of provision because it's named as an approach for schools to use for identification for specific learning disability within IDEA, which means it's also then invoked for dyslexia. And again, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about sort of not knowing what to do for kids with dyslexia, we really do, and schools have the freedom and flexibility to implement that effective instruction. These are complicated issues, but we need to be providing, teachers with the training that they need to be able to implement those practices effectively. We need to support schools to rely on that evidence to really make sure that students that have these reading difficulties or that are at risk or maybe have dyslexia are getting access to instruction and intervention before it gets much more difficult to do that. So another sort of big takeaway with this is that there are a lot of critics of response to intervention, I think, particularly related to identification of dyslexia, sometimes with respect to implementation or just using it as a service provision model and rolling out services. And this is not a blame game for schools because, again, these issues are complex. But I don't think that the problem is actually response to intervention. The problem is that we're not implementing it and we think that we are. So it's a complicated approach. Adria and I work with schools all of the time to help them understand that this is a framework, that it has multiple components that do need to be implemented and implemented well for all of, its sort of promise to be realized. Transitioning to sort of what are the available support services for students with dyslexia. And we have several structures that provide or sort of dictate what the support services will be for students with dyslexia. That includes, terminology like general education, 504 plans, individual education plans. A new one is high dosage tutoring, right, which is sort of something that has stemmed from our research on the COVID pandemic and for students that are falling behind or have not had access to good instruction over the last several years. How do we catch them up, so to speak? There are also different formats that are used in schools for instruction. So we have sort of whole group instruction or small group instruction, push-in approaches and pull-out approaches. But the big question is really, what do these supports look like in a way that they're effective? So we say, like, we're gonna implement high quality instruction, but what is high quality instruction, right? What does that actually look like? And so when we're talking in the early grades, and I'm using that framework because this is sort of a lot of the focus right now is on prevention of sort of the difficulties that are associated with dyslexia in elementary schools. But in those early grades, core reading instruction, which is what all students should have access to, should really focus on, at minimum, all 5 big ideas that have been identified in the literature over time to attend to what we call the simple view of reading, which is a primary theoretical approach that drives how we should be thinking about reading development. It drives a lot of the science related to reading. So that simple view of reading looks at reading proficiency as being the product of listening comprehension, so my ability to understand what it is that I hear in language, and decoding, my ability to read words that are on a page. And that product is what gives me then good reading comprehension. So when we're talking about dyslexia, we're often really talking about the decoding aspect of that formula. So if we have poor decoding skills, that can affect our reading comprehension because it's part of the equation, right? And so we really want to focus on supporting students to learn those decoding skills. So in the early grades, those 5 big ideas that we're talking about a lot are phonemic awareness, phonics or decoding skills, reading and accurate and fluent reading of connected text, and then on the other side of the equation, vocabulary comprehension, oral language type skills. Again, for students with dyslexia, it's really that former, those 3 skills that are associated most strongly with decoding itself. We also want these supports in schools to use explicit systematic instruction. There's broad consensus that explicit systematic instruction is the best way to teach students to decode. And what that means is that teachers are modeling for students the specific skills that they want them to learn and demonstrate. So as it's sort of the for lack of a better phrase, the I do frame of instruction, where I'm showing you exactly what it is that this looks like so that you can see what an expert reader does as they're reading. I think that there's lots of modeling that does happen in classrooms. The sort of next step of this is, I think, where things sort of fall apart, which is the guided practice stage. And so this is where I maybe am giving a model, but then I'm giving students opportunities to practice, and I'm giving them feedback right away on what it is that they're doing so that they can adjust and continue to practice in an accurate way, in an effective way, so that they're building skills rather than potentially building some misconceptions in their understanding of what it is that we're teaching them. So ample practice with feedback, and then providing independent practice so that students can build toward mastery of the particular skill. A couple of other comments on this, that the target of instruction should really be making sure that we're giving students access to tools that endure over time. So when we're talking about decoding instruction, we want to teach the skills that we'll always be able to use. When I encounter a word now as a 42-year-old woman reading a book, I can use my decoding skills to decode the text that's on that page because I've learned those skills. That's what we want for children. We don't want them just looking at pictures, because those are removed from books, or syntax, because that doesn't always work for us either. Our decoding skills are those that endure over time.
Nancy?
Yes, please.
One of the things that's really resonating with me as you say that is, I was trained in undergrad and graduate school MSNV, right? So meaning, syntax, visual. And so that with a student who may be struggling with a word, that often with young readers, you're saying, look at the picture and think about what would make sense. And there was much less emphasis on actually thinking about letters and sounds. And also there was emphasis on sight words. You just teach sight words visually, like you don't teach them in ways where they're also looking at patterns. Like, so much has shifted really quickly, but it's still a long shift. And I want to go back to even folks that I taught as a university professor and say, I had it wrong, right? I've learned more, we've all learned more, and like we continue getting better. And you know, people often comment on like, oh, education is just so faddish. But the way I think about it is medication and medicine, right? We learn in medicine, like certain treatments work or certain medications work, and practices change. And so it's that being collectively open to that changing over time in education. But I definitely got it wrong with the ways that I prompted kids when they were struggling with words.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the science of reading is an evolving body of knowledge, right? So it's something that is continuously updated over time. I think research and education is relatively new. I mean, we talk about sort of the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education, wasn't founded until 2000. That was only 2 decades ago. When I was a kid, teachers are, they're doing their best. I did not learn to read like everybody else. It was more challenging for me. And I remember vividly in first grade, my teacher pulling me aside one-on-one and sitting with me and trying to teach me the code, because I wasn't learning with the broader system. So fortunately, I had a teacher that was paying attention to that and knew what to do when I wasn't reading. I benefited from that for sure. And so as we think about how we move forward, I think all of us owning up to our own sort of our own mistakes in the past, understanding that this, again, the science is evolving, and we need to pay attention really to that science. What is the science of reading telling us about what is effective and what works for kids? And we have to use that at minimum as a starting point for what we're going to implement in classrooms, recognizing there may be local adaptations or cultural adaptations that are necessary, but we have to start from that evidence as the primary frame. Otherwise, we're doing all of our children a disservice. And the other thing, just a last comment on this, supports for students with dyslexia and thinking about what this looks like. The other thing that I see happen a lot in classrooms that is mind-boggling, and I understand that teachers are dealing with so much. They have a lot of students in their classroom. They're very diverse needs in every classroom context, and it's difficult to think about how you can effectively differentiate instruction for students. But I often will see a sort of a workshop model or centers approach used in instruction, reading instruction in particular, where early on, say in first grade, you have kids meeting in small groups with the teacher for, say, 10, 15 minutes. And then the rest of the classroom time, they're rotating and they don't have any instructor support. And so instead of using a small group approach, there are whole group approaches that we can use for teaching kids decoding skills that give students constant engagement with text, with decoding skills, so that they're able to learn and get more practice than they're obviously going to get if they're sitting by themselves for 45 minutes of a, say, 60-minute reading lesson. So there are available supports for students with dyslexia, and I think it's great, getting experts together like this to be able to advocate for what those supports should look like in schools, to support them to use the existing resources they have and potentially gather more resources to implement more effective services.
I really appreciate that everyone so far has really affirmed teachers that, teachers in classrooms working hard every single day, like doing the best imaginable, entering into that work with great love and commitment, but also thinking a lot about this, as an organization that serves Detroit and the mama of a child who goes to school in Detroit. Not all teachers have access to the same kinds of professional learning or tools, and even, school libraries, right? Like our schools are so inequitably resourced. And part of that also is inequitable access to professional and collective learning. So that's why I'm really grateful for everyone here that we find ways to make this kind of collective learning just, more accessible to folks, so we can all just roll up sleeves together. So thank you, everyone that, collectively affirming teachers.
Yeah. And to go off of that too, the thing that I've really been thinking about that you mentioned, Nancy, is like that implementation piece. Like, yes, we need to make adaptations for local contexts, for the cultures and students that we see in our classrooms. And as part of my own education in like the science of and the processes by which we can effectively implement programs and curriculums and those things as they come about, right? That is also necessary. It's not only just, here's this 1.5 hour session on what this looks like, and then you go do it on your own. Like, we need continuous support and guidance, and so much more goes into actually learning and doing better every day. So I just really appreciate, just to go off of what Leah said. Thank you all.
Yeah, and I just want to add, as a former literacy tutor, this is such a hot topic that comes up all of the time. Tutors ask, does the student have dyslexia? Parents are asking, do you think my child has dyslexia? And I'm sitting here and I'm just taking notes because it's just such great information that I now want to share with and make sure that I pass on to some of my former tutors that I used to train. So great information.
Yeah, I think a big part of that too is that it's good to be aware of dyslexia and how it manifests in reading, right? I mean, the biggest thing that we want to know as educators in a school context is how intensive is that need, so that we can make sure that we're providing the appropriate level of support to get that student reading. I worry a lot about the emphasis on identification, and is the identification formal, in so much as that doesn't affect provision of services? Because what I'm most concerned about is that child getting what they need in a school system?
Yeah, and as the mama of a child with autism, Langston needed his diagnosis for lots of reasons. However, supporting him in the classroom, his preschool teachers were already doing that without a diagnosis, right? Like, so often we get held up with that diagnosis, and it's like, no, they already saw needs and assets and built on those, and we're finding ways for him to be successful. So thanks for lifting that up, Nancy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it relates to this next question about serious emotional disturbance, and to some degree how that affects services for children with dyslexia. In theory, it shouldn't affect access for students with serious emotional disturbance. They should have access to the same core instruction, the same supplemental supports, the same intervention. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, again, IDEA, advocates that all students are served in what's called the least restrictive environment. And so students should be getting access to the general curriculum the recommendation is to the maximum extent appropriate, right? Unfortunately, I think because schools are trying to do a lot of different things, and when we're working with students that have serious emotional disturbance, there are also additional supports that are coming into place. There are often decisions about placement that are not as favorable to least restrictive environment or going with that approach. It means that students get isolated, and as they're further isolated from other students and other supports that are available, the supports that are then available to them are sort of unnecessarily constrained. But my comment on this would be, really part of this work is really trying to make sure that across all aspects of our school system, everyone knows what effective reading instruction looks like and how to implement it as part of the services that are available, because our students that have serious emotional disturbance should be getting reading instruction regardless of where they are, and that instruction should be effective to support their needs if they have dyslexia or if they are showing any of those signs of dyslexia.
I'm wondering, Nancy, if you could talk about what you see as the relationship between development of reading skills and some of the more communication behaviors we see from students with emotional behavior disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak purely to the research on that, but I would guess that there's a bit of comorbidity related to those things. As students are learning to read can be a very frustrating process, particularly if you do have dyslexia or are, particularly maybe even more at the intensive end of that spectrum. And if that's frustrating and you're also dealing with other aspects of mental health or behavior that are troubling, that are sort of interfering with your ability to also attend to information or to regulate your behavior to continue to engage, that's only going to make this more difficult, more challenging, right? Students then are getting further behind in their reading skill, even though it's not really a reading issue per se, it becomes a reading issue because of some other factors. So that is that. I mean, and that's what special education law is intended to do then for those students. If those behaviors or aspects of mental health are interfering with ability to access the curriculum, it's intended to provide them supports for the primary disability category so that they can access reading instruction. But because of the way we identify dyslexia, because it exists on a continuum, I think then you do end up with kids that probably have dual diagnoses really related to both aspects of development.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you for this rich discussion. I'm so excited. I am going to be mindful of time for our audience and for the rest of our presenters. So thank you again. And let's go ahead and move on to our next session. And I'm going to pass it over to Elise.
So Leah, I'm really excited to ask you this question because I know that you've got a wealth of knowledge here to share. So how do we address access to supports for little humans with dyslexia? How can educators and program providers access dyslexia screening? And how can families and community members get involved in advocating for supports for students with dyslexia?
Yeah, thanks so much. And Amber, can we go to the next slide for this one? And this is something where, as a teacher, you know about supports through one lens, and then as a parent, you learn about them through another lens, right? So even an IEP or an individualized education plan, I'd been on the side of that as a teacher, but being on the side as a parent was a very different experience. And I found I also needed a different kind of skill set to advocate for my little human. So we just wanted to lift up some of these and also want to invite both our panelists and folks who are joining us via Facebook Live. Please drop in other recommendations or share them. We would love to lift these up. And Amber will have all of these curated on our website. So one of the things, obviously that we start with is we start with the school and district. Like Elise was saying, parents are asking, does my child have dyslexia? So starting with the teachers, starting with the school, and sometimes, that's enough, needs are met. At 313 Reads, we also have a lot of partners that are after school, out of school, and summer literacy programs. Some of them do intensive interventions, high dosage tutoring year round with kids. So we're also thinking about making sure, they have access to that. They may not have access to supports at the school or district level, but ISDs also serve them. I've linked here to Wayne Risa because that is the ISD that 313 Reads collaborates with really strongly. And I've also linked here to Michigan Department of Education. They have, under their learning disability supports, reaching out to those resources, to those offices, a lot of amazing resources, very accessible, very parent-facing. And Amber, can I pause and ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
This PowerPoint, I want to make sure folks understand how they'll get this to click on all these great links for resources. So how will they receive a copy of this deck?
So we are going to post this on 313reads.org/resources. This exact PowerPoint will be a resource with all of the links, and I will also help curate the links separately if you don't want to click on that and you just want some of the resources provided. I will do that as well.
Thanks, Amber. And because I'm also wearing my Michigan Reading Association hat, we'll have those resources available there too. And for time's sake, I'm not going to click through to all of them, but the National Center on Improving Literacy, Andrea mentioned this one, amazing resources there. Ones that as a parent have been amazingly helpful to me. And for me, it was because my son has autism. That's not the problem. He's neurodivergent, but some of the function of that neurodivergence and ADHD and Tourette syndrome and some other issues, he was having a hard time engaging in literacy instruction and really staying present in it, got very behind also in writing, and needed supports and accommodations. Tricky because he was also very high functioning, had a high IQ. So for me, reaching out to Michigan Alliance for Families was amazing. They will match you with a mentor. And if you're someone who isn't the parent, but you're serving families, please connect them with this. So that mentor was someone that I could call. She'd help me sort of like prepare for things, prepare for conversations. They have folks who can be in meetings with you. An absolutely amazing resource. It's parents trained to be your guide by the side. And also the same thing with National Parents Union Midwest. There are some sticky points and kind of navigating some things for the district. I joined National Parents Union Midwest, amazing organization. They, lots of like conversations and helping prepare. They even facilitated some communications with the school when we weren't quite getting, what we need. And they were also in meetings. So I would definitely reach out to these. And again, this is from a space of, I assume, all good intent with teachers and with schools and, working with limited resources and all of those things. But just getting at the space where we're also advocating, very unapologetically for the little humans who need the supports. And then also Autism Alliance of Michigan actually has been really deeply engaged around literacy and around Read by Grade 3 and dyslexia legislation. They're another amazing resource. So I encourage you to check out all of those and see if you're a program partner, what would be of use to you, what you might want to share out to families. So thanks, Amber.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Again, I think it's so important to have this like learning and then action piece of what can we do with this information now that we've gotten it. So thank you so much for highlighting all of those and using your personal experience, the many hats that you wear to really gain some weight to all of that. The book giveaway is coming soon. So thank you to all of our discussants. We're going to do a quick wrap up of some key takeaways, but I want to remind everyone, if you would like to be entered into the raffle, please go to tinyurl.com/LFCA Series 3. It's on Eventbrite, so you should still be able to register. I'm going to pull those emails and names and do a quick little raffle of a free copy of Overcoming Dyslexia. So if you are interested in that, please go to tinyurl.com/LFCA Series 3. All right, while that is happening, our discussants, what is one takeaway that you would like for all of the audience, our participants, to have after this session? What is one takeaway you would love for everyone to have after this session? I'm going to bring it over to Adria first, but feel free to also take a second to think before you want to speak if you would like.
Well, thank you, Amber, for making sure I knew this question was coming in advance. So the big thing that I want to highlight is empowering teachers in terms of you can make a difference. We have this incredible study where they had typical readers and children with dyslexia, and then they did brain scans, looked at what was happening in the brain while they were reading. And then they gave them basically a school year of really solid, high quality, explicit instruction in reading. And then they did the brain scan afterwards. And it literally changed how their brains were more efficiently going at the process of reading. So we have the power in our hands with instruction. Instruction is like a really evidence-based, powerful medicine. So we can do that. And it's also not 100% on you teachers to take this on your shoulders. You also need systems that will facilitate this and make this more powerful. So that's where I want to highlight the work that all of these organizations are doing that Leah brought up, and then also thinking about really the systems decisions in multi-tiered systems of support, is where we're trying to make sure those systems are actually providing teachers that support that they need. So thank you to 313 Reads for having this session too. These kinds of engagement are amazing, and thank you for the opportunity to let us reach a broader audience.
Thank you. That's so powerful. Nancy, what is one takeaway you would like for everyone to have?
Well, I had the same reaction as Adria initially. So I was very grateful that I knew this question was coming, because I was like, just one takeaway. What do I say? I mean, the primary takeaway, summing up the points that I made earlier, was that dyslexia identification may or may not require special education. If it does, we want to make sure that students are getting access to those intensive interventions that they need as soon as reasonably possible. But in the absence of that, what I would love to see people advocating for is really effective general education instruction to benefit students with dyslexia and all students broadly. So it connects also to Adria's points related to just instruction and the power of instruction, knowing what it can do for kids and really changing their trajectories, increasing their access to opportunities across the lifespan. And yes, thank you all. Thank you to 313 Reads for inviting me to be here today and participate in the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you. Also very powerful. I'll say for me, mine is very similar to Megan's comment right here, right? Like, we are all in community together. We are all learning and growing together. And we are all helping each other be the best resources and the best supports for our students and for our children. So for me, that's really the takeaway. Is I feel such a strong sense of community with the broader literacy community here in Detroit and in the United States. So Leah, what is your one takeaway from the session?
Yeah, thanks. A key takeaway for me here is just I really appreciate the brave space to be vulnerable about, like, we're all still learning, we're figuring it out, and lifting up that some of the things that we thought we knew, we can unlearn. And someone mentioned in one of the comments earlier, know better, do better. And for me, that's the thing that sticks. Like, we're going to continue learning about this, and we're going to continue doing better. And that's a good thing. So that's a key takeaway for me. And I'll pass it to Elise.
Yeah, I think you kind of summarized some of what I was going to say, is that this is a process, and we are going to continue to learn as we work through this process, but also just the resources that are available is a key takeaway for me, that there are so many resources out there. And we actually are linking them, as we've mentioned, on our website. So I'm hoping that people will take advantage of those resources.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. So I am, as we all know and love, technology, still getting access. You have a couple more minutes to fill out that tiny URL. Elise, if you could please walk through some more resources. Again, we're going to have these on our website. But if you can kind of go through some specifics of what all of our participants can look forward to finding on our website.
Sure. So a number of these have already been mentioned. And as Amber just stated, they will be available on the website. So you can download the slide deck and go to our website, which is 313reads.org/resources. And you will be able to access all of this information. We do have items hyperlinked, so you can just click on those hyperlinks and it will take you directly to the websites. And please check it out and make sure that you pass this information along and that you share it. So again, our resource list can be found on our website at 313reads.org/resources.
Elise, would you mind going through a couple of the bullet points and what those, and talking about them, specifically highlighting the MRA conference, learning about the Michigan dyslexia laws, and some other toolkits that were provided and referenced earlier in the session? I'm still having some lovely technological wait times. So thank you.
Sure. So the first one is the NIH-funded research used to inform federal policy, Learning Disabilities Research Centers and Learning Disabilities Innovation Hubs. And you can also check out and compare reading screening assessments with National Center on Intensive Intervention and the academic screening tools chart. So that is hyperlinked, along with some research-based criteria, some toolkits, and the MRA conference.
Can I speak to that one?
Yes, I was actually going to, because you attended that conference, I believe.
Yeah.
To share some information about that.
Yeah, so I was really grateful. I was part of the Coalition of Chairs for last year's conference. And this year, Andy Schoenborn is the conference chair, and it's going to be amazing. Please check it out at the MRA website. The call for proposals is up now. And what we really want to emphasize, this is me and my MRA hat, is we welcome proposals from classroom teachers, literacy coaches, intervention programs, community-based programs, but definitely an emphasis on evidence-based reading practices, code-based science of reading. So it's a space where even if folks are thinking, I don't think I want to present at a conference, great, come to Grand Rapids and be a part of the conference in March, mid-March, and learn more about these things and be in a community to just continue growing together. So hope to see you there.
Thanks. And again, please just visit the website and you can check out more of the resources. And a lot of these, again, were mentioned earlier, and I hope that you will share this information as well. So I'm going to kick it back over to Amber.
Thank you so much, Elise. All right, the moment we all have been waiting for, the book raffle time. I'm so excited to be able to give away a really important and interesting book. Hopefully you all can see this wheel of names. I am not cheating, right? These are all of the names that we have in here. So I'm going to go ahead and click to spin, and whatever name we find, I will reach out to the email that you provided on Eventbrite for some shipping information. So here we go. Drum roll. Catherine, we are so excited again, and I've loved your participation in our comments as well. We will reach out to your email to find out where we can ship this book to you for free. Thank you so, so much. All right. We have gone to our full 90 minutes, but if there are any questions, please feel free to put those in the comments. We will have everyone responding as necessary, but we really wanted to thank you all for your participation, for your audience time here. Please find 313 Reads, Adria, Nancy, Leah, Michigan Reading, Improving Literacy, all of those great things. Please go and follow and bookmark all of those things. We really appreciate everyone taking their time to be here today to share their expertise and to really be in community. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, but we're kind of wrapping up. Thank you.
Thank you again, Amber, for championing this and facilitating this. And thank you, Elise, for facilitating. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Adria. Really grateful for all of you.